Comic books come in all sorts of genres and styles. Although superhero floppies are the ones most people think of, there are trade paperbacks, manga, horror, sci-fi, the list just goes on and on. Like comic books, the people who read comics come in all sorts of variety too, from people who read a new book every week to people who only watch adaptations, and everyone in between. This is POW, the impact of comics.
My name is Alex Winters. I've grown up with comics since I was maybe 6.
Hello, my name is Amanda Perez. My experience level with comics is I have some comic books about two actual graphic novels. One is The Killing Joke and the other is Robin. I also have a loose leaf of Supergirl. I think that was my first ever comics. And I also have when it was first published, the Teen Titans. It would come every month in the mail. And that's how I started getting more comics into my life.
My name is Caleb Hoback. I'm a pretty avid comic reader.
Hi, my name is Diana Inigas. My experience level with comics is probably intermediate. I'm more of a casual comic book reader, if anything.
Hi, I am Ryan, and my pronouns are she, her. I'd say pretty experienced. I've been reading them basically my whole life.
Well, I haven't read about one or two, but I like the movies. I like to go to the movies because that way I can follow the story of it.
Tanner Kirby. Comics have been in my life since I was very little. I used to read the Sunday newspapers, read the Peanuts, and shoot, what was it? Something Circus, Family Circus. I used to love Family Circus, Calvin and Hobbes, all those little, run-of-the-mill comics that you would read in the Sunday paper. And I would also watch cartoons every Saturday morning. The 90s Spider-Man cartoon, the 90s X-Men cartoon, Justice League Unlimited, all the Batman animated series. Basically, if there was a superhero cartoon, there's chances are I watched it. So I was always into superheroes. And that in turn led me to kind of get into comic books. Now, I didn't really get into comic books until I was probably high school or even middle school. I mean, I think I might have read a few here or there, but what really got me into comic books was a comic book called Invincible. And I got into Invincible, started reading it. It was what, comics have got this, notoriety to them to where, if you're reading a comic book, people are going to look at you weird. But with Invincible, it was so adult. It had such adult themes to it where I was like, I have to read Invincible. And then, of course, Walking Dead. We're seeing comics just come into media.
It was probably watching them on TV.
I remember my aunt, she actually got me some of the original versions of the 1960s Spider-Man comics. It was amazing. She got me like 8 little I don't know what you call them, but just 8 little volumes of Spider-Man, and I didn't realize that. I guess they were so valued. I was just a fan of Spider-Man, and these little comic books were so cool. And then as I've gotten older, I'm like, oh, these are some fantastic relics.
When I was in elementary school, my school had this book at the library that was a character guide for the X-Men. And I checked that book out so many times, loved it so much. And I knew so much about the X-Men because of it, despite never having read any X-Men comics. And the school didn't have any superhero comics. They had some Bone. They had some graphic novels, but I didn't actually start reading superhero comics till I was in about middle school. When I decided to, walk in and ask, hey, this is what I'm into. Where should I start? And I got my first trade, which was a Moon Knight volume, actually. and my first issue, which was a Nova issue.
I think it was one of the Spider-Man ones because I actually like Spider-Man.
So there was this one DVD I remember, sorry, not DVD, VHS that was in a cassette box where you would pull it out of the entertainment center and you would look for it. And it was called Batman and the oh my goodness, I can't even remember that. It was the Phantom Mask. And for the longest time, I would just be like staring at it and asking, can we watch it? Can we watch it? So my grandma and my aunts that were taking care of me at that time were saying, no, not yet. No, not yet. It wasn't until like maybe 5, I was going to say maybe 7, when I finally asked, and they said, sure, yeah, fine, let's watch it. So we put it on and then we watched it, and I was blown away, like, wow, who is this? Why, what's going on? Who's that guy? Like in like the clown makeup, kind of laughing, menacingly. And it wasn't until they said, oh, that's Batman. He's he's a superhero, but he doesn't have any superpowers. He has his mind to help him, and also he's really rich. Like, cool. So then they started talking about everyone else, Superman. It was mainly basically all the DC characters. Marvel, I knew some of the Marvel characters, but that was later on because it started from Batman and moved on to Superman. Then it moved on to Wonder Woman. And then finally, when it started becoming like a TV series, a cartoon series, Justice League, that's when I started watching them for a while. But then I would get sidetracked and not see it or not keep up until finally in, I believe, 2005, 2003, when Teen Titans finally came on, and I was like, oh, yep, there you go. This is my jam right here.
So I was hanging out with my dad, and we went to like a Barnes and Noble, and he was really into sports and I really wasn't, and he was trying to find a way to connect with me, and we were going down aisles, and I was pretty young, and he got like, he found this like little kids comic book. It was like a superhero squad kind of thing, and I loved it. And he went to the register and he was like, oh, this is a lot of money. I don't think we're going to be doing this again. And he was wrong. Mostly superhero kinds of stuff like that. I like that they're like, it's filled with people who are trying their best to be good people. And I think some of the best comics writing is just like characters being decent people, you know?
Superhero, a lot of Spider-Man. I've got a lot of Peter Parker Spider-Man. I've really been getting into Miguel O'Hara Spider-Man 2099 comics. I have a couple Miles Morales Spider-Man. I do have quite a bit of Justice League comics as well. It's kind of a departure for me. I think the artwork for a lot of these comics, at least the ones that I try and find, I think they're just beautiful, very eye-catching, and yeah, I just love looking at them. The whole idea of a superhero has always been interesting to me, just kind of the moral values, the principles, the actions. I love the idea of being a person who is put into very challenging situations, with Spider-Man, very relatable situations, and always figuring out how to be the strong and good person in those situations, and never faltering to greed or taking advantage of another person. So I feel lucky that I grew up with superheroes always kind of in my mind, because, and to this day, I really kind of like acting like one, you know, like just following those values.
I really do like the superhero genre. For science fiction and horror. Oh, fantasy also. There you go. Science fiction, because there's always something to be learned in life, and then also like in books, even though it might teeter on fiction a lot, but I do love science fiction because it takes you out of your regular routine and give you something to think about. For fantasy, the sky's the limit. we could be sitting here and then all of a sudden we could be sitting on a spaceship. I just really love that about fantasy. But then there's also that level of you have to prepare the reader or prepare the audience for where you're gonna take them. You can't just be talking all of a sudden, oh wait, we're on the moon. How do we get here? Why are we here? So it has to be you have to know what you're getting into in order to surprise your audience in a way. And then also horror, I just really do love that suspense of not knowing what's going to happen next. And yeah, the graphic of it is pretty, the pretty graphic. But other than that, I do really enjoy horror because of the whole you don't know what's going to happen, don't trust anyone. And I think that's maybe a test to who I am, but I just really do enjoy reading it.
I'm mostly into Marvel. I also do like Image, and I'm not sure if this counts, but I do like manga as well. Well, I like Image because it's they have more stories besides just your typical superhero um, tropes. Like one of my favorites is called a saga. It's really good, and it's about a couple in outer space. And then for Marvel, I was more introduced to Marvel through the animated series, the X-Men. And I like that it's like a variety of different people that pretty much anyone can be a superhero. And what I like about manga, I just kind of reading it from like a different perspective, like that is not like Western, I guess from a Western point of view. So I like to see what's out there.
Horror and sci-fi, but I'm also a sucker for I guess the superhero genre, and I like when they do horror and sci-fi. So your Justice League Dark, your not really not as much Guardians as I should, but X-Men, love X-Men, love Batman. With horror, I always am interested to see how different artists render their scary ideas, and what sort of different monsters that these artists come up with. For sci-fi, I just love looking at big landscapes with fun colors, all sorts of stuff going on. So I guess it is mainly in the art, but I also really like the kind of psychological writing that some horror comics can have. And then I love world building, so sci-fi comics usually have pretty heavy world building, especially Jonathan Hickman's X-Men stuff.
Ooh, that's tough. That's tough. This is gonna sound weird, but I like stuff that makes me feel something. So that could be any genre. I mean, there's horror. I like some of the horror novels and graphic novels that are comics. What's weird is Superman. There's a lot of Superman stories I love, but I wouldn't call those action stories. I would call those more drama, because Superman, I mean, you get in a fight with Superman, you're just gonna lose. There's not much action that could take place. But with comics as a whole, I like stuff that makes me feel something. Invincible made me feel something. I mean, I would consider that one an action one with emotion and everything behind it. So I mean, honestly, you could say, oh, I like soap opera comic books, but I mean, if it makes me feel something, then I think it's a good comic book. And there's a ton of examples of that. Spider-Man Blue, Superman for All Seasons, Superman versus the Klan. There's a ton of different emotional stories out there in comic books, and we're already getting adaptations of those in film media and in TV as well. The stigma surrounding comics, they're seen as kind of childish, even if they're dealing with adult themes, and I think we're kind of growing out of that in this day and time. I'll tell you, there's a lot of my friends who, they love comic books, way big comic collectors than me. But they have, there's something a little childish. You're seeing a child read a book like a Dr. Seuss, and it's got text with imagery and drawings and stuff. And, as an adult male, if someone's looking at that, they see you looking at drawings and text and stuff, people might think that's a little childish.
So for me growing up, it was kind of the bullying. When I was growing up, before like Marvel Studios, before the MCU, being a so-called nerd lover of superheroes, that wasn't cool. That was something you got picked on. And so for me personally, I didn't talk very much about superheroes. I was just a kid who let my mom dress me in Gap clothes, and that was that. And now as I'm older and superheroes are cool, I kind of go out of my way and I wear more superhero clothes. I got a couple Superman shirts, Spider-Man shirts. I got a Deadpool onesie because they're cool and they're more accepted now. So just during when I was growing up, it was more of kind of, it wasn't cool. Nowadays, geez, I think with the MCU and the DCEU, superheroes are cool. They're kind of badass, and I think maybe the biggest issue is that there's just so much information, and you could go anywhere, and that's kind of daunting. So if somebody was eager to get into the comics world, they would just need a little guide to kind of tell them where to start. Even I'm learning, like I don't know everything. I mean, yeah.
Knowing where to start, especially in the superhero genre, there's this whole history and all sorts of like continuity things, reboots, and with DC, their crises and all sorts of like alternate universes and stuff.
Right off the bat, there is just so much out there. There is really so much out there. There's all because at Marvel, since it's now a very big multi-million studio, a lot of people are like, yes, I want to know more. I want to know more. But then when they go to their local comic book shop, sometimes you're gonna have people are like, oh, well, do you know this? Do you know that? Then, yes, you can go off of the films, but you need to start at the beginning. And then you have some who have been, there for so long, try to tell them all that they need to know in one setting. Okay, so here's the difference. Here's the Earth, but it's not our Earth. It's a different Earth. And there's a parallel Earth where, I'm just going off of Marvel and DC right here because that's like a lot of, those are the franchises that a lot of people are associated with at the time. There are more like a Dark Horse. That's also a very good graphic printing press, but I think it's just very overwhelming. And especially if you're a new reader, you want to be able to communicate with your peers, but at the same time, even I have that problem. I went to see the new Doctor Strange movie, and there are things where like I'm like, okay, if I say this, will I get in trouble? Or maybe I should just wait until I get home to do my own research because I know the character. However, with comic books changing, with new series coming out on Disney Plus and streaming websites, like if you're not up to date with them, it could feel very overwhelming. And I think that's why it's there. People are kind of skeptic to go into comic books at this moment.
I think it depends. For me, it has to do with my gender, because I know that comics is a very like male-oriented space. So people are kind of like, oh, you're a girl, or girls aren't into this, or I know for me, it's generally my gender. So I know that's why some people think comics is like primarily a guy thing.
A lot of comics communities are really intimidating. And I've talked to people who were saying that they really wanted to get into comics, and they enjoyed like movies or TV shows, or even they were just like, oh, I think this art is neat. And they talked to people about it, and they were really discouraging. And they were like, oh, if you don't know comics, like you just watch the movies and stuff like that. And really rude about it, and so they kind of were just dissuaded from reading comics, and they didn't really want to do that. And a lot of the times it's like not super welcoming for women or people of color or queer people, because like there's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on.
This time, I think costs. A lot of people will want to go see shows like Comic-Con or like movies, but if they have 2 or 3 kids, it's harder to pay for that. I think more special events where it's open to the public and it's like somewhat free to get to it.
Have it widely available and kind of everywhere, like, you know, especially since a lot of people here, we have smartphones, just have more accessibility, and to have like more, you know, I guess non-white or non-men to write more, you know, be behind comic books or behind creating creating comic books. That way we can see, oh, if somebody, like, if they find out, oh, this story was written by this person, they're more likely to read it because they're like, oh, finally there's a story that was written about me. So something like that.
Making more superheroes that look different and that behave different and that can kind of be for different groups of people, and that way, like, you can have people, like, you can have, like, let's say a Black person go like, oh, I can see myself in you know, Black Panther or Miles Morales, or you know, you have different characters for different groups, and that also will negatively impact the people who don't want those people involved in comics. And I think that that'll kind of be good to also, like, they'll start to be like, oh, this isn't a this is a space that's welcoming to other people. I don't want to be in this space. And that kind of also gets rid of the gatekeeping. I think. I don't know about the second one as much, but I think that the first one would help to open it up a little bit.
So when Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, which like was the big DC continuity reboot, there was this side project that they were also doing called the DC Who's Who, which was just a big character guide of every single character they ever had. And I personally think that we should bring that back. We should bring back like character guides and stuff, because I think that that'll really help people like get a sense of like who the major players are in universes, and also just show them some characters that they can then, you know, like look at it like, oh, wow, that character looks cool. Read about him. Oh, wow, they have a cool story. Where can I find more of this character? And then on the less superhero side of things, I think that just a general, like, I'd say, how would you say, like lifting up more like non-superhero titles, I think would help a lot, because then it would show more and more readers like, oh, it's not just superheroes that I can read about in comics.
There are platforms that help the readers or people who are curious, because even now we go to Google and you're like, okay, Google, what happened? And you have different variations of what happened to this character or to this storyline. But then also you can go to either like YouTube and type in something like, why is the new 52 like this? And then you have certain people giving their information on it. I do know that there are certain apps, but maybe if there's like one where it's like, it's a comic books, it's okay, we got you, something like that, where it can go into certain genres and tell you, okay, here's what you need to know about Marvel, here's what you need to know about DC, here's what you need to know about this new show called The Umbrella Academy, here's what you need to know about this, and that. And then you have your webtoons when it's like, and you want to learn about internet comics. That's fine. We got you covered. Here's the steps that you need in order to do this and that.
I think there's comics out there that could be used in a classroom setting. I think that there's comics out there that people could really use in that classroom setting to really teach lessons about things that are going to happen in life and things that have happened in the past. And I think the stigma, I think it helps when you have people in your life who are comic readers and kind of can give examples or show you kind of what that looks like in general of, hey, here's a great comic story, you should read this one. Me and my friends, when we first started, really diving into comics, it was all about reading different things. And I'm into weird stuff that they're not into. I like Max Landis, knock on wood. He's not he's not a good guy in real life, but his writing is spectacular. So there's Green Valley is a great comic that he wrote. I like independent stuff is what I'm trying to say. While they were more fans of Marvel, DC, I'm more of an Image Comics guy who's reading Outcast and different things that, not going to appeal to everyone. But it's the same with, video games or anything else. You have a good friend group who can, recommend things to you, then obviously you're more likely to pick up that comic book. Or if you have, even an adult figure in your life who's like, hey, I really like this one, you should pick this up and see what that makes you feel like. When I got one of my friends into comics, I told him, the first comic I told him to read was Spider-Man Blue, which is a comic about the death of Gwen Stacy and dealing with grief and depression and how to get out of those ruts. And it's a very emotional story, but that hooked him instantly. It was one of those things. He's like, I'm never going to read a comic issue to issue. I think that's as far as a stigma for comics goes, or why people are afraid to read comics. I think that might be another one. People think that comics are issue to issue and you have to read them like that. You have to read, if you're on issue 127, someone's going to see issue 127 and be like, I ain't reading 127 issues to get up to this point. So there's a lot of, graphic novels and stuff that people just don't know exist, that you can kind of refer people to create that opportunity for them to get more into comics. So with him, he was like, I don't want to read. He's like, there's Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, just Spider-Man. What do I read? I'm like, read Spider-Man Blue. It's a self-contained story. You'll love it. And he did, and it hooked him. And then now he started reading a bunch of graphic novels and other things. Yeah, I think there should be more variety. I think that there should be a huge promotion on independent stuff that's new. I don't think we should. I like the idea of creating new things. I don't think we should make 5 different versions of Superman and call it a day. I think we should have one version of Superman and then make different things that go align with Superman. So I mean, there's a lot of creative stuff I would change, but for the industry as a whole, I think there's got to be something done to help these little mom and pop comic book shops that are kind of dying, whether that's embracing the digital sphere and doing like a subscription thing for in-person comic book shops. I think that could work, especially with stuff like we're seeing in the movie theater industry with the like AMC A-List, Movie Pass of the world. Something like that, something that's going to help those comic book shops stay open and get, steady supply of people coming in.
Open up more to like different, like, creators, different artists, writers, to just kind of see what other people want to see. Also give opportunities for people who have never really had the chance to kind of like tell their own stories.
I would like to see a lot more diversity. I know Marvel's starting to chip away at the diversity.
It's hard because we get a lot of like representation with like more indie publishers, and like even the big two at Marvel and DC have been like doing better in recent years. I guess I would like to see less editorial mandates with Marvel and DC. And, just more letting artists kind of do free reign, kind of like what DC did at Vertigo. And what I assume they're also doing at Black Label, because they're putting out some pretty good stuff through that. Yeah, just I guess more like creator autonomy, and like mainly with the big companies, and then I don't know like if I can say more opportunities, because there's a lot of like festivals and like comic festivals of all kinds, and I think it's just like knowing where they are. But like, you know, there's so many, it's like that's where like new creators can go and, you know, share their work and show it off. And then I find a lot of, you know, new comic creators on the internet. So I mean, I don't really know if I can say like, oh, more opportunities for smaller creators, because um like I see small creators taking opportunities like all the time, and it's really cool to see.
I mean, on like a structural level, I'd like that like artists to be more credited for their specific work.
I think for me personally, this is kind of a niche thing, but I'm looking for more horror-based comics to be adapted into live action. Going back to Marvel, I'm hoping that they continue to kind of grow up with their audience. I've noticed that, you know, a lot of the movies that are PG-13 kind of have been geared for a younger audience. I remember seeing the first 2008 Iron Man, and now I'm 21. Okay, I've kind of grown out of the younger stuff. Like, let's see if we can mature this a little bit more, you know, dive into some more serious issues. I think that's why Civil War was so amazing to me. It got political. It dealt with some serious topics, and I think that's one of the best Marvel movies. You know, I recently saw Doctor Strange, and I was Multiverse of Madness. I was excited for that because they were going more the horror route. But for me personally, I thought they were kind of just a couple notches too soft on the horror. You know, so I just hope Marvel keeps kind of growing with their movies there, with their audience. It's huge in the art world. It's another way for people to digest complex and interesting stylistic stories. It's just another medium. And you know, with art, you kind of pick your poison. It's kind of whatever reaches or connects to you. And I think it's nice that comics is just another avenue for people to figure out how they can connect with art.
I think that it's important. I mean, I like reading them, so like that's why I value them as important. But I like culturally, I think it's kind of neat to see human, like an aspirational view of humanity and like the best of us.
It's just giving me more access to like see things that are not, well, at the time when I was growing up, it wasn't that mainstream. So it kind of gave me the curiosity to see what's even out there.
They not only do they give us a sense of a break from reality, they also help us in a way with understanding people. I think it also holds up to a mirror to people who seem to be okay but also not okay, and to see that there are other people, even if they're fiction, know that they're not alone. And I think that's why I like comics, because it helps people in a way. It's soothing.
Because it keeps people like not forgetting what like what good is.
Comics are important because they tell us stories. I think stories that can affect change in people, stories that can, you know, change people's mindsets. There's a ton of different comics out there that kind of help people to understand what was happening in that time and place. And the best thing about comic books is they're accessible to everyone. No matter the age range. I mean, you can look at the pictures and kind of figure out what's happening, but there's a lot of, you know, events that happen in life that people kind of demonstrate through comics. There was actually a post I saw on Reddit yesterday of a guy who talked about the first time he lost a job and how that created a new opportunity. And I think he was doing like a Kickstarter for it or something, but it was his own comic book that he created about one life experience that he had. And then there's a ton of other comics that kind of give you that feeling of, you know, what was happening during that time. There's Mouse, Superman versus the Klan is a great one as well. There's I can't think of his name, but the guy from Star Trek has a good one on the Vietnam concentration camps. I think it's called We Are the Enemy or something like that, or We Were the Enemy or something. But there's a ton, Little Depressed Boy. There's a ton of different comics that, you know, explain, you know, emotions as well as time periods, and they're just so accessible for everyone to kind of dive into them. Because I mean, you can read a little text blob and then see a picture and kind of know what's going on. And it just helps people to better understand, you know, sometimes having a visual with that novel really helps engage people and brings them in more. You know, there's different aspects of my life where I relate them to the stories I've heard within a comic book, to where my morality and my decision making is kind of used baselined on those stories. So I think they've affected my life a lot. And a lot of my friendships are from comics, talking about comic book movies. I mean, hell, who hasn't seen the last Marvel movie? Have any conversation with anybody on the street, it might as well be asking somebody, how's the weather? They're going to tell you what they felt about Doctor Strange. So with me, I would say comic books have engulfed my life, and, you know, they've affected me in tremendous ways of morality and growth trajectory and decision making.
It's just kind of been, honestly, on that, it's kind of been a positive, because people will like go see the most recent like Marvel movie, and then they'll like come to me and they'll be like, hey, did you hear about this thing? Like, what is this a thing in the comics? And like in high school growing up, that I was known as like the guy who read comic books, and so I was able to be like, yeah, this is a thing that did happen or didn't happen, and going to talk about that. So it helps to be like social with a bunch of people who like, it's a thing to talk about with a bunch of people.
So I'm a filmmaker, and comics is actually a big place that I go to for kind of source material, very much like Marvel Studios. And I love looking at the visuals and seeing how I could take that and recreate it in a live action short film, student short film, you know, or eventually a feature film. Some of the comics, they have very basic story arcs. Some of them have very complex stories that intertwine with other superheroes, and I like kind of that general idea of story structure, and I try and take that and apply to scripts that I write today.
The fact that I dream that I have superpowers is one. Or my alter ego has like telekinesis power. Like, ah. So besides that, it's given me some confidence that I didn't think I needed, because there were some. My first issue of Teen Titans comics was when the team is up against gosh, I forgot his name. He calls himself the greatest kung fu master ever, and he steals a staff that ends up switching all their powers around. It showed that whoever was writing that, whoever was drawing, was taking into account that their readers are not the same, that their readers probably are 13-year-old, maybe even younger enough to read it, and they probably don't know how to feel being a 13-year-old or going through this sudden change in life.
I look forward to it. So whenever anything is coming up that I know, when we go to the movies, I'm always looking forward to what is gonna be the next movie that is gonna come out.
In times of like stress and just general like, oh my god, everything is the worst. If I'm following like a little series, I'm like, oh, but at least I have that to look forward to next month. You know, it feels like they've been such a part of my life that I'm not really sure what it would be like without them. Sometimes if I'm like if I'm like stressed or I'm like running errands, I'll just take like an issue or like a volume, and I may not even like plan on reading it, but just like the fact that it's there makes me feel a little better. For new readers, I'd have like two things of advice. One, there is more than just superhero comics. And two, don't worry about continuity at all. Just go with your gut. If you see something, you're like, oh, that character looks cool, start there.
I'll tell them that they should try to look into all of them and try to find the one that he is more interested on it, and he'll realize that there is a lot more into that character that it doesn't get shown on one movie. If you go back to him, you will find out how the history, how he became what he is. Try to look to see if there is anything that interests them, and that will surprise them when they find out what's the history about all the comics, books, and movies.
I think my advice would be know where you want to start and find your way from that. Be open with all the comics. They're not going to be the same, even if you have this mindset where, yeah, it's going to be the same, but they're not the same. Yeah, just be flexible. You probably won't get into them overnight. And if you do, good for you. But if you don't, there's other outlets out there. There's YouTube, there's Google, there's your friends. Although be careful with your friends because they have a biased opinion on everything. So be careful and just enjoy your trip to Wonderland.
So depending what you're more interested in, if you're more into like, Western stories, I go with Spider-Man. If you're more into want to know more about like Japanese, I guess comic books or manga, I recommend Death Note.
I would have them start with what was it, the 1970s Linda Carter Wonder Woman show. I don't know. I that's kind of what I grew up with. Yeah, that's really where I started with like the visuals. I remember getting the Netflix DVDs in the mail, and my family and I, we'd watch the Wonder Woman series, and then eventually I then saw the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, and so those two were pretty big for me. Same with the Tim Burton Batman. So I'd start them with those three. You kind of got to hit the classics. Yeah, and that way I think they would appreciate some of the more recent and very the technology, the special effects in those films are just incredible. So going from Linda Carter to Gal Gadot, I think they would appreciate it a little bit more.
Shoot, that's hard. If you're good like me and you have a local library, or if you have an app called Hoopla, Hoopla is a library card app where if you use your library card, you can rent any comic book you want, basically. I do that all the time. I'll do it almost monthly. You get you a tablet and there you go. You're off to the races. You can read whatever you want, no matter the genre. You can look by genre and figure out what you want to watch, what you want to read or, dive into comic book wise. And they've got basically everything on there, which is great. So that would be my first advice. My second advice would be, what are you into? What's something that drives you? And I could ask you what music you're into and make you a recommendation on comics. I could ask you, what gets you going? What's going on in your life right now? And I could make you a recommendation on a comic. If I know that you're going through something like one of my friends was when I recommended Spider-Man Blue, I would say, read Spider-Man Blue because this deals with depression, grief, and how to deal with those things. And then, if you're into civil rights stuff, I might recommend Superman and the Klan. If you're into history, I might recommend We Were the Enemy, or I might recommend Mouse, or, there's a ton of different avenues I can make a recommendation to y'all. If you're into science fiction or horror, I might recommend Lock and Key. If you're into, I mean, it can go a billion different directions because comics is so huge into different avenues of entertainment, different, even if it's, I mean, Superman's one of the most recognizable, Batman's one of the most recognizable things. I can make, a self-contained story. I'm not going to recommend starting out with Superman #1 or Action Comics #1 and just, hey, start with the New 52 and read from here to there. I'm not the person to do that, but I am the person to be like, hey, go read Superman for All Seasons. Hey, go read Superman Up in the Sky by Tom King. That's a great one. That's a newer one, but it's a good one. And I might make suggestions like that. I'm not going to give them any events or anything that's like, okay, you need to have knowledge of this event that took place in this time, but so-and-so's not Batman anymore because he died 5 issues ago. I'm not going to recommend anything like that, but I'm going to recommend something that's self-contained and something that you can really put your, grasp your hands on and really feel and understand that self-contained story. I don't feel like Green Valley gets as much love as it deserves. And I think that's probably because of Max Landis and what the allegations and everything against him, which probably were true. But Green Valley, I love. I could recommend Green Valley to anybody because I think that's a thing that would have deserved to have a movie or a TV show. And the plot to Green Valley is, I'm not going to spoil it or anything, but it's basically what would happen if a time traveler visited King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Like what would happen if a time traveler visited the medieval times and the Knights of the Round Table and kind of just took over. That's the plot of that book, and it's super interesting just to see kind of what happens, and it's very action oriented, and it's definitely it's definitely something that's not for everyone. It's science fiction, so but it's got prehistoric elements and time travel things. I dated a fashion designer for a while, and I read Girl in Dior, which is about Christian Dior's like fashion rise and his like rise into the fashion industry. I was dating a fashion designer, but that was super interesting because it was about his history, and all of the panels, all the panels and all the writing was something that you would see in like a design booklet. So they were all in those like drawing of what an outfit would look like or a dress. But it was about his history and how he did his first fashion show and basically everything leading up into when he passed away. So it was a super interesting story. And I did it for her because I was like, oh, this is something she likes. So this is an example of a person where I was like, you can find something based on what you like. And she's a fashion designer. So with her, it was reading the Dior book, the graphic novel about Christian Dior and his rise to fashion stuff.
For manga, I recommend Monster.
Soul Eater. It's a story about middle school, almost high school students who are going to Death Academy to start to reap souls of the wicked, basically.
The series that I have not been able to shut up about since it started has been Arkham City Order of the World by Dan Waters and art by Danny. It is so good. Yes, it takes place in Gotham. Yes, it is main continuity. No, you do not need to know what is going on with like current Batman books to understand it. It actually recently ended like a couple months ago. It's only a 6-issue thing, and it follows this psychiatrist that used to work at Arkham Asylum before it was destroyed again. And that's like the only thing that you need to know. And the book tells you like within the first couple pages, like, oh yeah, the attack on Arkham known as A-Day. And then it just plunges you right in this story of Dr. Joy, who is trying to find her missing patients and doing everything she can to help them. And I've never seen a Batman comic so like blatantly focused on the mental health of Batman's villains. And I thought it was so important, and I loved the art and the like horror elements of it and how it utilized like lesser known characters. It made 10-Eyed Man scary. It brought Dr. Double X into the spotlight. it did the best, like Professor Pig since his introduction. I'd say this was like the best use of Professor Pig since Grant Morrison made him. Characters like Dr. Phosphorus, Nocturna, just really cool dynamics between the characters, and using like lesser known ones, and just it's so beautiful, so well written, amazing. I love it.
Comics and its readers face stigmas every day. However, thanks to things like the MCU, The Walking Dead, and the CW making adaptations that intrigue new readers, comics have begun to become more mainstream. While the industry can use some changes and fans could benefit from broadening their horizons and just diving in, the industry has attempted to make strides in combating these barriers for new comic book lovers. There is something for everyone to enjoy about comics, and this is why they have such a large impact on a variety of people.
If you don't want to read, then don't read. There's audiobooks, there's anything you can do. There's like a wide world of comics media. And I think that you should just tap into what you're comfortable with, and don't worry about anyone who's like, you have to read the comics. It's like, you can, but even if you want to do that, there's like, you can watch YouTube videos about that comic. You can listen to podcast episodes about that comic. There's so many ways you can kind of engage with comics and superhero stuff as a genre.